broadcasting, or prefer the verb to broadcast here. Um, I'm in downtown Knoxville, but standing next to this Tennessee icon around the state. Thinking of Nashville um, and the African American Music Museum that I visited earlier here in Tennessee. The thing that struck me was many of the early spirituals that we know today, that we value today, um, that are second nature to us, would have been lost with the last singer, with the last member of the tribe over from Africa, with the last family member, with the last community member here in America, if you can call, African Americans here when they came over any sort of community. They would have been all lost. All those spirituals would have been lost if not written down. Because by writing them down, you ensure that the next generation will hear them. Without writing them down, they are lost forever. And this extends far beyond music, of course. Many of the fairy tales we have today, whether it's the Brothers Grimm, uh, you know, um, Hansel and Gretel, um, Pinocchio, Cinderella, all would have been lost unless someone wrote them down. They were all stories told around a campfire. They were all stories told in a community or among family members and passed from generation to generation. And that's fine. But what if the last member dies without passing it forward? Then it's lost forever. So that's what I mean about broadcasting and the importance to broadcast. Of course, there's many ways to broadcast. Um, and one way of broadcasting is to literally broadcast. Here in Market Square, 22 and a half East Market Square. 26. There used to be a music shop run in the 50s by Sam Morrison and his wife. And it was called Bale's Music. And I believe it was on the second floor. 22 and a half. He didn't have the whole building to himself. In any case, he would get records, 78s from representatives around Tennessee and such that would drop off a few records. Say, here, see if you can sell these. This is the latest, greatest. One of the guys that dropped off records was a Sam Phillips, who had a recording service down the road here in Memphis. The other side of Tennessee dropped it off, said, hey, listen, this guy is tearing up the radio stations around where I live. And he's got the concert circuit going crazy with all these girls screaming. See what you think of this guy and see if these sell. The record was That's All Right, Mama. And so one day, to bolster sales, Mr. Morrison threw a couple speakers in the back windows facing the alley, the flip side of this building. Threw some speakers in to promote his record shop and his current music wares. One of the records he threw on at that time was That's All Right, Mama by Elvis Presley. And walking along the boulevard or the market street that day happened to be Mr. McEwen, who was a representative for a New York City company called RCA. Mr. McEwen looked up, listened to that odd sound coming from the windows, and went inside, being impressed and sort of inspired by what he heard broadcast out of those windows. Picked up a couple of 78s from Mr. Morrison and was on his way back to New York City to hand those 78s off to Steve Scholes, who was at that time a big wig in RCA in New York City. Steve Scholes heard this 78, and it was a few months later he signed Elvis Presley to RCA Records. And you say, well, okay, that's the story. What's so significant about that? Well, for one thing, Elvis no longer was restricted to the South. Elvis was no longer stuck in the South. Now, Elvis was above the Mason Dixon line. Elvis now was in New York. I'm sorry, no offense, Tennessee, but Ed Sullivan gets a little bit more ratings than the Grand Ole Opry. Who didn't like Elvis, anyways? Steve Allen. Once he gets out of the South and is broadcast into the North, the kids that loved him in the South now could love him in the North. And it opened up not only the country, but eventually the world to Elvis Presley and to rock and roll. Broadcasting here in Market Square in downtown Knoxville. It's the street it's a guy the street calls William. Here on this Thanksgiving weekend.